Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Madness and Grace podcast. We're excited you are joining us for another episode. This is Dr. Madeline Stiers, and we also have
Dr. Matthew Stanford.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about trauma and the journey of healing. So we know that the trauma isn't just psychological. It impacts, your whole self. It really can make a change in your worldview and totally shifts that after someone has experienced a potentially traumatic event. And so what we mean by a traumatic event is, of course, kind of the standard of what we think about: a physical assault, a sexual assault, but also, combat and war issues, if you're kidnapped or held hostage, but also some things that people may not think about as often. So natural disasters, those of us here in Texas, especially Houston, are very aware of hurricanes and the flooding that occur and how that can really leave an impact on a person. And then also kind of man-made disasters, so bombs or explosions or things like that, chemical issues. And then there's also a special section, spiritual trauma. So when a faith community is using its beliefs or systems against you and it's doing negative harm against you or others. So that's kind of what we mean when we talk about trauma. Not this, I don't know, Matt, maybe you see this too, but as someone who researches trauma, I see out in the ether all of these people saying, well, that must be, this is a traumatic event. And they got into an argument at the grocery store, and that's not at all a traumatic event.
Well, I think that, right, absolutely. I think
unless you're physically attacked,
Right. Unfortunately, trauma is kind of a buzzword now. People will talk about it, and they'll put their things that have happened to them in the context of trauma to try to help explain things or whatever, for whatever reason. I think you made a couple good points there. One, it's an emotional and physiological response. I mean, trauma is a very physical thing. And really, it's actually trauma, what we talk about, it's really less about the event and it's more about the impact that it has on the person. And I think the other thing is that this is an event that overwhelms. It's either an event or a series of events. I'm sure we'll talk about that too. It could be a series of events, but it overwhelms the person's ability to cope. I mean, it exceeds that level of coping. And we all vary in the level of coping we have. So what you might consider traumatic, I might not consider traumatic for certain events. I mean, most of the things you named, everybody would say. Like, sure. I know I've worked with and met people that were in pretty significant car accidents. And it was horribly traumatic to them. But then I know other people that were almost killed in a car accident, and it was just like, that was no big deal.
That's why you see veterans coming back from combat zones. Some are struggling with PTSD, and others aren't.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the problems that I see a lot of times when you're talking about supporting people that have been traumatized in some way is minimizing the result. I mean, another one that I've seen are people where their homes were robbed, even when they weren't there, and it really, really impacts them. They never feel safe again. They show post-traumatic stress symptoms. I mean, they are really damaged by that event. Now, again, it a lot of times has to do with their level of coping and experiences they've had in the past, but could be tremendously traumatizing to an individual. So a lot of times we kind of minimize it. I mean, nobody says to the combat veteran, oh, well, I need to suck it up. And I know the bomb blew up next to you and killed 10 people, but I mean, or the rape victim and things like that. So
absolutely. So when I'm talking about a traumatic event, I mean, I think that's how you're seeing it too. Really kind of the DSM diagnosable traumatic events where your life is in jeopardy or there's the perception that your life is in jeopardy.
Right.
I mean, all of these events. So I guess any situation you could be out and perceive that your life is in jeopardy, not talking about a PTSD symptom, but, these kind of situations where you really do feel like you could die. And then that's a
And
very
trauma, trauma's
scary
like I wrote down some different kinds of trauma, like not just the kind of event like you mentioned, but like acute trauma, like a
Sure.
single distressing event, or chronic trauma where you have repeated exposure to traumatic experiences, or complex trauma where it's as prolonged. A lot of times you think about like childhood sexual abuse in that context, that's prolonged kind of interpersonal kind of, and then even secondary trauma where you talk about like mental health care
hmm
providers or first responders, they see what's occurred or they work with the
During
people that have been
COVID, we really saw a
big
lot of
time,
that.
big time, so
Absolutely.
they're actually traumatized by the
Yeah.
experience of working with people that have gone through the experience.
hmm
And so, I think that a lot of times people don't think about it that way. And then they also put it, I think a lot of times just as a human, we contextualize other people's experiences within our own experiences. Like, that wouldn't have really affected me. I would have
Why are
sucked
you
it
so
up.
upset
And
about the flood? Like, it's fine.
right.
House
Well,
flooded, I'm
my
fine.
house flooded and I just got over it, kind
Right.
of a thing. And yeah, right. I mean, really,
Yeah.
but the other thing is, so you do think about combat veterans, which is our, that kind of is our quintessential example of trauma. Was,
Sam.
one guy in the foxhole is horribly traumatized and the other guy right next to him isn't. But they're not the same person. Even though they may have gone through virtually the same experience, they come to the experience in a different way and
Absolutely.
with different things. And so I think those are just kind of, I think those are really, kind of all general good points that we make there. But
Yeah.
for me, like, I know you're more the psychotherapeutic side. I'm more on the neuroscience side. For
hmm
me, I think one of the big thing is this idea that trauma, or when we say trauma, we're talking about after the trauma. And so the impact of
Traumatic
trauma.
response.
And I think it's very important that people realize it's very physiological in addition to emotional, because you really are physically trapped in the moment of the trauma. Your body is still having a stress response that's just ongoing and easily triggered. And so physiologically and emotionally, you're really kind of tied to that
Yeah.
moment.
So to break it down, when we think about a stress response, or when people typically think, okay, this person has PTSD, they're being triggered. That's the word that we hear out in the world a lot now. What you're saying is exactly right. And I think layman's terms is they're having an emotional response to something, some sort of symptom, an event that's reminded them of the trauma. And then also internally, inside their body, their brain is reacting as though they are oftentimes reliving it. Those same neurochemicals are being shot through their body, cortisol. And so they're physiologically going back into that fight or flight response, which is very stressful on your physical self, like your whole system internally, not just our emotions, right? It really impacts everything. And then outside of, like you said, you definitely talk about the physiological aspect of it, and the neuroscientist in you goes to that. I love to break it down when I'm talking to someone who may have experienced a trauma and they're really struggling, right? Like, obviously there's some great books out there, but what can come from a trauma is these triggers, and then they have these thoughts, and there's these emotional responses, and then maybe behaviors and physiological responses. Taking out the physiological response, it's kind of in there, but we have this cognitive triangle you can think of. It's our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors are all connected, right? So if you have a thought, oh no, I'm not safe in my house, is someone breaking in after someone has broken in? What's your emotion going to be? It's going to be fear. It's going to be panic. It's going to be anxiety. And from that, you have a physiological response internally, right? But then you also have a behavioral response, which might be that you're barricading the door, or that you're not willing to stay at home anymore, or that you're calling people frantically. And all of those behaviors may have a negative impact on your relationships, because now that's stress on the relationship if it's a continual thing. And then within all of that, you may be also thinking, why is God doing this to me? Why did God let this happen? So we kind of can really see in that one example how a traumatic event can really impact all of these different areas of a person. And it's interesting, just like you were saying, not everyone who experiences the same event, even if they're in the same exact event, has the same response afterwards. Not everyone, their response in a religious or faith fashion is the same either. Oftentimes sometimes people will have the response of God was there. He got me through this, even though I'm really struggling. I know my faith will get me through, and I feel this support. And others may feel afterwards, how could God let this happen to me? Even if their faith was strong before, it might have been a total flip of their worldview, and now they're questioning or angry with God, or don't feel safe in that relationship. And that's always an interesting question to get. But when you see people struggling after a traumatic event and they're questioning their faith, the questions are almost always the same. How could God let this happen to me? Did I do
How could
something?
God be good? Is God good?
Yeah. Or am I being punished? Did I do something to deserve this?
I think that one of the things I think people don't understand in the context of trauma is that since you're kind of trapped in the event, you're reliving the physiological experience, you're reliving the thoughts. It's an overwhelming experience. It overwhelms your ability to cope. And so for a person to be able to move beyond that, they have to, what we oftentimes will describe as, they have to process their trauma or work through the trauma with a therapist, where they literally kind of relive that experience mentally, and they work through it and recognize that perhaps it's unlikely to happen again, or what would they do in that situation, or what are those feelings that they're having, helping them control their physiology. It's not just the idea. A lot of times what people think is, well, you just have to get over it. You got to forget about it, because it overwhelmed your ability to cope. And so now your brain and your body are desperately trying to figure out how to protect you from it happening again. And it doesn't know how to do that. And so,
Right.
so really, when someone gets treatment for trauma, they really need to make sure they go to a trauma therapist, someone who really is trained in that. And most therapists now are trauma informed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the therapist is trained to work with trauma. I get calls all the time from people that usually it's a parent of an adult child. Could be someone in their 20s, 30s, even 40s that had a trauma early on. They've never been able to make progress. They're looking for help for them. And well, they've gone to this counselor for a long time. Well, is that person a trauma therapist? Well, I don't know. They work with people with trauma. I mean, I don't even know what that means a lot. And so a lot of times what it is they're not even really getting treatment that's focused on trauma. But I think the most important thing I want to get a point across to people is that it really isn't just a matter of just stop thinking about it or forget about it.
That'll never happen.
It's just never going to happen, right? You're never going to be able to move beyond it if you don't work through it. And again, we're talking about people who have been exposed to trauma and then they're showing post-traumatic symptoms and signs after that. And just to kind of put that in context, to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, those symptoms and signs, they have to be present a month or more after the experience, because everybody has an acute response. So when the pandemic hit, when the flooding happened here in Houston, I mean, you could just name a million different things. We all had those acute stress responses. That's normal, but it isn't supposed to continue on, certainly not past a month, because then it's very physiologically damaging and mentally damaging. I mean, it destroys your heart. It destroys really your whole cardiovascular system, your nervous system. I mean, it's very physically damaging to have all of those corticosteroids, stress hormones pumping through your body. You're not supposed to have those for more than a few minutes, really, to get you out of the situation. It just really damages the cells of your nervous system, and your cardiovascular system is really stressed out. So, I think that's another important thing. And you mentioned religious kind of coping, and I definitely wanted us to talk about that today. I know that's something that you really have done a lot of work in. But one of the things I hear, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this topic, is working with as many churches as we do, and me engaging as many pastors as we do, or people involved in ministry, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard this statement, and that is something along the lines of, well, you just need to take that trauma and lay it at the feet of Jesus on the cross. Or something along the lines of, well, you need to stop living in the past. You need to just give that to God and live now. And I understand why someone says that, but your trauma is not your sinful behavior that you're going to lay before Christ, or it's not even your life in general. It's an experience that you've had that's damaged you.
One that I hear a lot is, you need to forgive. And that really
Yeah.
does put the onus on the
And
survivor.
you really are minimizing what's occurred on if it's
Yeah,
happened to this person. And it's a very self-righteous kind of, even if it's not said with that kind of motivation, it very much
sure.
is. And so I just wanted to say to people out there, I mean, that kind of, can faith be an incredible supportive tool in your recovery? Absolutely. And I strongly encourage people to engage their faith, but it also can be really damaging if it's not used in the right way. And then, as you said, one of the first things, particularly people of faith, will ask when they're traumatized is, where the heck was God in that? Why did that happen to me? Is God really good? How can God be good if that happens to me? In fact, in our trauma group, the material that we have that we use, ours is called Hearts Transform. One of the early sessions is God good? I mean, is God good in the context of what happened to you? So I think faith communities need to be a little bit more aware of trauma. And the reason I say that is because I think faith communities have a huge role to help people in their recovery.
Yeah,
Huge role.
in the same way that someone who comes to therapy for help with their trauma, it's not often a very quick, okay, 4 sessions,
Oh,
you're
no.
totally fine, and now you can move beyond this and never think about it again. I mean, that's one, oftentimes these individuals are never going to forget what happened to them. That's just not the reality of it. It's learning ways to cope with the response and the triggers and the symptoms that they're dealing with and how to have healthy life and relationships. It takes time. It is an ebb and flow process. Some days will be good and some days will be challenging, and you have to identify what's going on with you so you can kind of rein that in and switch to a more effective coping skill. That takes so much time. And therapists that are trained in this realize that and work through that with them and can support in that role. So I think it's important for faith communities to also be aware that while it might seem frustrating that someone is not, quote, getting better, the fact that they're showing up and feeling safe enough to share their concerns or their laments in your faith community with you or with whomever, that is a sign that you are offering a space for that person to heal, and that maybe it's not happening as quickly as you like, or it may be challenging for you. But if we continue to offer this space and recognize it takes longer than we would like, then we can really be an effective place as a faith community to offer that support,
No quick fix.
It's not a quick
In mental
fix.
health, there's generally never a quick fix, but particularly in trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I've run our Hearts Transform group. I think there was a few people who the first 3 rounds, and they're 16-week groups, they're not short groups. The people went through it multiple times. It's the same lessons each time. It's the same 16 weeks, but they get something different from it each time they go through it. And I could have said, or we could have said, you've been here once. No, you can't keep coming. Well, what kind of message is that to deliver to someone? Is you've come and we've given, now go away. It's
an event or events that changes you forever. And so, it's something you'll deal with forever at some level. I think what I normally see is this, first the event happens, and then the first response for most people is to avoid and not try to talk about it and not try to remember it and just put it out of your mind. So they're going to try to just begin their life again and try to put it off somewhere in their brain where they can keep it apart from everything else. And no, I don't want to go to a therapist, because if I go to a therapist, then I'm going to have to talk about it. And that's not what I want to do. And so then that doesn't work over time. So they're triggered and they're isolating, and it's affecting, like you said, affecting their relationships and their ability to function. And then at some point, which sometimes can be years, which is really sad to even imagine, but then they finally at some point go, okay, well, now I'm going to go to a therapist, trauma therapist. Let's hope that they go to the right person to begin with. And then they suddenly find out when they go into that it's tremendously painful to go through the therapy.
absolutely.
Because now they have to remember it. They have to relive it. They have to experience it again, even though they've been experiencing it, but not really recognizing that that's what it is. And then the numbers of people who drop out of trauma therapy is just astronomical. So they
Well,
just
it's
drop
hard.
out because it hurts so bad. I'm not doing that anymore.
It's interesting. There's at least what I've seen in my practice is we have women who are 60, 70, 80 who are showing up in need of support because what they experienced and when they experienced it in childhood or young adulthood, they were told, just sweep it under the rug. This isn't something we discussed. Trauma was not a common topic of discussion, and therapists weren't doing trauma work the way they are today. It's a relatively new in the last 2 decades. I mean, the research around trauma and religion is even less. I mean, there's very few.
Think PTSD even is in the diagnostics manual till like the 3rd edition, or maybe like the 3rd edition. And that came out like in 1980.
The 1900s.
Yes, I mean, the 1900s. When I was born back in the 1900s.
In the 1900s.
I like saying that.
Say that to me, yeah.
But, I think that's the thing is like you're trying to make, this isn't some easy, quick fix. And so people need to be aware of that when they have friends and loved ones that are going through this. This can take a lot of time.
Yeah. And then the other side of that is I see very young individuals, and it's primarily women. I'm not saying men don't experience trauma, but we do know that women go to treatment more. I think we're seeing a little bit more men in therapy now, but very young individuals showing up now because of the way that social media is this platform for people to talk about their mental health. And they're doing that, whether it's true or not true information, but people are more comfortable asking for help. Obviously, there's still barriers and there's still stigma associated with it. But I think these younger women that I'm seeing that are coming and sharing and asking for help and going through treatment, 50 years ago would have been the 70-year-old that's in my office today. And the older individuals that show up, the pain to go through with them is a very different sort of pain that you see as a therapist because they have hidden and stuffed down and felt to keep silent for decades. Younger individuals show up and are willing to scream it at you. They want to tell you what happened. They have this need for justice, and that's great. It's wonderful, and there's pain there too. It's just very different. It's
another painful thing for those older individuals who they don't come in till that point is they also recognize as they look back across their life how that trauma has damaged their life.
So there's a lot of grief over the course of their life. It really is.
It's one thing if it just happened last week and now you've gotten into trauma therapy and it's another thing to look back across decades of your life. And then as you're going through processing this trauma, you realize, oh my gosh, I mean, this marriage ended because of that. I lost this job because, you start to see how it's just really, really hurt you over your whole life. I think that, churches have a huge role, I think, to play here because they can be a great support system. Strong social support, if you look at the literature, strong social support is without a doubt one of the most consistent predictors of recovery. And so when people have that, because what you don't want to have is you don't want to have people saying to you, you just need to get over that, or you need to quit talking about that, or I don't like it when you talk to me about that because it makes me sad, so I don't want to hear about that. Well, that doesn't help anybody.
It's hard for me. Yeah.
It's hard for me to hear that you've been hurt, and so, but churches are a great place for supportive healing. That's really what they're for. In a very holistic way. So, what churches need to think about here, I just wrote down a few things churches can do to support people. Number one, they need to really create a safe and non-judgmental environment, which a church should be, but unfortunately isn't a lot of times, but most of our institutions aren't, but a place where people can share or feel comfortable sharing. I think leaders in churches need to be trained in trauma awareness. They don't have to be trauma therapists. They just need to be aware of some of the things that we're talking about right here. I think they've got to avoid these simplistic and dismissive responses, particularly in a spiritual context, like some of the ones I mentioned earlier. You just need to put that at the feet of Jesus. Absolutely. You need to seek out Christ in your recovery. But it's not like you just lay that down in your mind mentally and then that's it. You're never going to remember that your father, raped you from the time you were 6 until you were 10. That's not just going to go away, and so I think offering support groups and referral pathways, how to get to mental health care providers. Support groups are easy to let, we have a trauma group that you can be trained to run. It's run in churches all over the place. It's used
And
for all
support
types.
groups are so instrumental in,
Absolutely.
because so what often we see happen and what we hear from pastors, right, is that people show up and they want to talk. They need a place to talk. And oftentimes, if they're not in therapy, they're wanting to talk a lot. If they're wanting to talk, they want to connect and lament and grieve and share and, all of these things. Well, especially in like a smaller mid-sized church, one person cannot bear the burden of that with every person who shows up that needs some sort of support. Spiritual support, yes. But when you add in this psychological, emotional support for a specific event, like they're not trained for that, right? And so
Right.
that's what we do is we go out and train faith communities in how to recognize this, understand it. And if you have a place to direct that person to, you sit and you listen and you validate and you hear and you say, I have the place for you. I know exactly what will be helpful for you. And it's our Hearts Transformed group. And it's on Tuesday at 6 and, whatever. And you can give them that information. They can come back and they can go to that. And that we're sharing the support there in that sense.
It's not a replacement for trauma therapy, but boy, it's an incredible support. They meet other people that have experienced similar things. They know they're not alone. They're able to talk, like you said. They're able to get that out, very cathartic. They learn things too. They learn coping skills. And ours is a faith-based, as you mentioned. I mean, one of the things I would say that makes a trauma support group a little bit different than some other kind of support groups is with trauma, you really have to make sure the group, everybody had the same experience. So, if you have combat veterans, then it's all combat veterans. If you have, like our group here at the Hope and Healing Center is women that have been the victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. So everyone in there is a woman and they all have experienced one of those or some event related to that, because that way they can share with one another in a more meaningful way. I originally developed that group to be used with people in Libya that had been exposed, civilians that exposed to combat during the revolution. So people that are untrained to be involved in combat are suddenly exposed and then they're displaced and they were living in like what you would think of as a refugee camp. And so they're horribly traumatized, but everybody within the group has the same type of trauma. So if you're a faith community out there and you're thinking about, it'd be great to have a trauma group, well, you might just look around and see what your greatest need is. Like one of the things I know, we see a lot of women that come here that are domestic violence survivors or the victims of sexual assault. And, that was just what we started, but you might have combat vets, you might have people that have, who knows? I mean, it might have been a flooding, it might have been a tornado, it might have been whatever. So I did just want to mention, you mentioned something earlier, just to give people a context of what we're thinking about the numbers within the population. About 7% of the U.S. population has been traumatized in some way. That's kind of what the number is. And it is women are more likely to be traumatized than men. Now, there's a lot of debate on why that is. I mean, some people say, well, if you look at the list of potential traumas,
did you say 7 or 70?
7% of the U.S. population.
Oh, okay. It's a lot higher worldwide. I mean,
oh yeah. Well, I mean, my gosh, you don't have to go out every day and look for food.
1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men will experience some sort of traumatic event in their life.
The thing is that I think when they say 7%, I think they're talking about people that actually meet criteria for
diagnosed.
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying. So, when you look at the list of traumas that you might experience, a lot more of them are kind of more female oriented. It's not that men can't be sexually assaulted, but women are much more likely to be sexually assaulted. I mean, so
and like kidnapped. I mean,
exactly.
Women are more often kidnapped. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, some people argue that one of the things is that women are just more likely to be assaulted and things like that. Some people argue that it's really more equal and men just never report it.
Don't report it.
Which is certainly, there's no doubt that men are socialized not to be involved in types of things like therapeutic types of things.
Yeah, men or young boys. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, just socialize men to be, you got to be strong and not talk about your problems and just get over it, that kind of a thing. And that's probably why your average suicide victim is a middle-aged white male. I mean, that's probably why, because men are more likely to have heart attacks because they don't deal with their stress. I mean, it's like a lot of things going on there. So you are looking at that's a pretty good subset of the population that would be diagnosed. And then if you really think about just the numbers that wouldn't be diagnosed, they still experienced it. Doesn't mean it doesn't affect them. So you're looking at a pretty good subset. And all you got to do is watch the news, and you quickly realize if you just look at all the natural disasters that we have, I mean, we live here on the Gulf Coast. I mean, we're getting close to hurricane season. Their stress response is going to be up, wondering if we're going to get a hurricane this year. So, think about everyone who went through Katrina. I mean, those kind of things can. So it's
you
not
live
like
in a large city. I mean, people are
absolutely
assaulted, you get
crime,
into car
violence.
accidents. Yeah, it's not uncommon for.
It's not all about pandemics. I mean, this is like everyday kind of stuff. And so this is something that affects everybody. So, if you're a faith community out there and you have people that are traumatized, and you have an opportunity to really not only help your congregation be more supportive, help your staff be more supportive, but you also can be therapeutically supportive by offering support groups or lay counseling, mental health coaching, things like that. So I would say go to our gateway to gthu.org. If you go there, Gateway to Hope, that's where we have all of our training. We offer a lot of training that would help equip you to better deal with these types of things. So I think that it's just something we need to be more aware of. The final thing I would say, and I don't know, I probably should have talked about this much earlier because this is kind of a soapbox issue for me, and that is people have got to stop calling things trauma that aren't trauma in their lives, in the sense of like, oh, well, Dr. Stiers came down to my office earlier and she did not call me Dr. Stanford. I mean, that is so traumatizing to me. The thing is that, we do this with a lot of things in our society today, and social media has a lot to do with it. The way we refer to people or refer to events. When you call something trauma in your life, that clearly is not traumatizing. It did not cause you to have a physiological stress response that is holding on, and now you're going to have to work through it. Just like when you call something depression in your life that isn't depression, you minimize what happens to other people.
Or maybe you have experienced a traumatic event, but when we're constantly crying wolf in a sense.
Trauma.
And that's not to say what they're going through isn't stressful or has enraged them, or, I mean, we just need to label things appropriately.
Because it makes it less likely that other people are going to get help. And that's the whole point. And it also makes it less likely that you are ever you actually, what you're doing is you're redefining reality. And so someone else is going to pick up on that and say, see, these things aren't really traumatic that these people are talking about. And so you need to just get over it. I mean, I know you were raped, which, I mean, that just sounds like ludicrous when I say that, but those kind of things happen. So we have to be careful using the word. Again, I'll go back to what I said right at the beginning. Something in my life may have been traumatizing, and that experience, you may have that same experience and it may not be traumatizing to you, but that doesn't mean that everything is trauma. And so
in the literature, which not everyone is in, but it's called a PTE, a potentially traumatic event. And that's because the situation was potentially traumatic. That doesn't mean it was traumatic to you, but these potentially traumatic events are well-defined events where your life is in jeopardy. Me going down and screaming at you in your office and then leaving, while upsetting, is not traumatic.
Right. And I think you made a good point. I mean, when you look in the diagnostics manual at the criteria for PTSD, and not everybody who goes through a trauma is going to have PTSD, and you still can be hurt by the trauma, obviously, and not have PTSD. The definition requires a life-threatening event. Mm-hmm. In fact, they actually removed the potential aspect of it. It used to be potential life-threatening, or perceived, I should say, life-threatening. They removed that. Now, it's not removed in the ICD, which is the more international one. And I think that most clinicians still look at the perceived aspect because sometimes it's a thin line, but we're talking about a serious event here, and we need to think about that. We don't, it's not little minor things that happen to you throughout the day that affect you emotionally are not traumas. And then the idea of being triggered is another one that we hear a lot. And again, that concept of being triggered, that's come out of the trauma literature, and it's been kind of usurped by others.
Emotion. People use it to just say that they are
Right.
experiencing a negative emotion
Exactly.
or
You said something to me
unpleasant.
that caused me to have a negative emotion, and you've triggered me. Now, again, I understand what they're saying. Okay. And so, yes, I guess we could use that term, but you've usurped a term that had a very specific meaning. And what that does is it damages people that have really been traumatized and are really triggered. I mean, what we used to think of as triggering is, and again, I'll just use a real cliche-ish one that I saw in a movie one time, is the Vietnam vet who is
Fireworks.
walking down the street of New York and a car backfires.
Oh,
And all of a sudden, he goes into this full-blown flashback of being in Vietnam because it sounded like a gun going off or a cannon or a tank or whatever. And so, that's what we used to think of as triggering. Or I'm driving down the street in which I was assaulted and I didn't realize all of a sudden there I am and now I have these, so I think we have to do better. We're hurting people.
I'll say one more thing and then
We're never going to stop talking about this.
But when you say you've triggered me, we're also doing like the opposite of what a healthy way of identifying and managing our emotions is. We're saying that you're causing my emotions.
Oh, yeah,
when really we have to own yes, something has caused an emotional response in me, which I am responsible for managing. Well, you triggered me. That's why I'm yelling at you. It really it takes any and all accountability away. And then it really diminishes when someone is having a traumatic response and is actually triggered and that experience is happening and they really don't have as much control over their response and their behavior. So
I just think we have to be, and it's not just trauma, it's any mental anxiety. Oh, I've got an anxiety disorder. Oh, I'm so depressed today. No, you're not. You're sad or whatever, Which
is a normal emotion. It's unpleasant and everyone experiences it.
And anxiety, the stress response that we see in trauma, those are all normal except when they're over the top and they don't turn off.
Yeah. We should do a whole episode about resiliency and lack of coping and how we really want to see people.
I mean, it's just
a lot of this to me, it just is people that don't have the skills to cope. And so they've landed on something that seemed effective and might have been effective and is now really not helpful.
I think, again, we're way off topic at this point, but I don't think most people even understand their own emotions. Like they don't, they don't even know what the difference between one emotion and the other is. I know that you added in years ago into our therapeutic intervention. I know that you added in like kind of a understanding your emotions. And people just don't even, they don't even know what they're feeling. And when you say something like you triggered me, which it really is kind of more in a whiny way saying you made me sad or you made me angry. Well, the thing is that where am I in that? I just sit around and let you come decide how I feel. Yeah, I might be angry at you. I need to think about why I'm angry at you.
Sure. And maybe you did something. Maybe you didn't. It's your responsibility to identify the emotion and then manage it. Right. But people will come in and I'll say, tell me what a thought is. Oh. And they'll kind of stare at me and I go, okay, that's fine. Now tell me what an emotion is. And they're like, it's something that you feel. And I'm like, that's kind of a synonym that you're giving me.
It's kind of a circular definition.
And so really differentiating between like your thought, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode, is like how your thoughts impact the way that you feel, which impacts how you behave,
right.
Which all impact your physiological response. Being aware of your thoughts and your emotions and your behavior, all of those things can help you, or your body response, right? Like your body sensation that you're experiencing, figuring out when you're becoming upset or elevated or sad and doing something to address it, That's what therapy can help with, or a wonderful support group set up in your faith community.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, faith communities have a huge opportunity here. And I would say that trauma is one of those things, regardless of all these things I've just said about people kind of minimizing things. Trauma is one of those things that just about everybody understands that if someone's been traumatized, they should get some help.
Absolutely.
At some level. They may not understand the severity of it and all that, but nobody goes, you shouldn't have been in combat. They don't say things like that. I have a compassionate response to that person. And so I think that it's a great opportunity if you're thinking about doing mental health kind of ministry or mental health outreach within your faith community. Trauma is a great place to start, just like addiction's a great place to start. There's a lot of resources, a lot of opportunity. The community is desperate for more assistance.
And the starting place is GTHU.
Absolutely. And it's just great. Just starting a support group makes a huge difference,
Yeah.
because what it says is this is a safe place to talk about your trauma, if nothing more than just in the support group. And then that can grow within your faith community. So thanks for joining us today. I know we got off a little track there. This is just a really hot topic for us, stuff that Maddie and I see all the time. People, unfortunately, aren't resilient anymore because we don't teach people to be resilient. They don't understand their emotions. They don't understand what a thought is and how all that goes together. And it's unfortunate because mental health service can really make a difference in a person's life when they're struggling. And I think a lot of times there's so much stigma and shame, we kind of avoid that. And that's one of the reasons this podcast exists. I think the church has a great role to play in really helping people be resilient, being supportive of people, and helping them get to the care they might need, and then supporting them as a healing community as they get better. So thanks for joining us. I hope you'll be back with us again on the Madness and Grace podcast.
Thanks for joining our conversation on this episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. If you found value in our discussion today, we'd love it if you'd subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It helps others find these important conversations.
Sharing this podcast with friends and family members is also a wonderful way to extend hope to those who might be struggling with mental health concerns.
We'll be back next time with another candid conversation about madness and grace. See you then.